Believe it or not, Harley Davidson used to be a performance brand. The motor company has won numerous races on the road, track, and dirt track. It held speed records, dominated motorcycle racing in the early part of the 20th century, and even won the Daytona 200 a bunch of times. Joe Petrali rode Harleys to dirt track titles, land speed records, and became one of the most famous motorcycle racers in the world. And the Sportster, released in 1957, is considered by many to be one of the first superbikes. So what happened? Where did all of those performance Harleys go? How did a company that dominated the racetrack become the company that now has the reputation of producing bloated, expensive status symbols that are all bark and no bite? Granted, Harley cruisers and touring bikes are competitive in performance with the cruisers and tourers of other motorcycle manufacturers. They're not trying to beat the top sport and naked bikes from Japan and Europe. They're doing their own thing. So stop criticizing, you Canadian commie. Okay, maybe Harleys aren't about performance anymore. Maybe tradition, feel, sound, and beauty have come to define the brand, the premium brand. Maybe all these haters need to stick a sock in it, because they just don't get it. Or maybe Harley just can't compete with the Japanese and the Europeans, so they stopped trying. Except for this, a 115 horsepower American-made V-twin Street Fighter. About time Harley got serious. This should stomp a hole in the MT-09's app. Wait, where is it? It was just here on the website, under future vehicles. Where did it go? Oh. Unfortunately, this type of thing has become a pattern with Harley Davidson. Introduce a high-performance engine and fail to put it in a sporty frame with proper racy ergos. And make sure that the guy who makes proper sporty bikes never gets your shiny new engine, but instead has to design his sport bikes around air cooling and push rods. And then of course there's the XR1200, which is one of the few Harleys that I'd consider buying. It would be accurate to say that this bike is one of the fastest Harleys in a straight line and the fastest on a curvy road. So, of course, the motor company cut it after 4 years of production despite promising sales in Europe. I got a chance to ride one recently, so let's take a look at this un-Harleyest of Harleys and see if it was really all that, or if fans of the bike are looking back at it with rose-colored glasses. Subscribe and hit that bell to be notified of more motorcycle content. And now it's time for a story. Once upon a time, Harley Davidson produced what is considered by many to be the winningest race bike of all time. The XR750 raced on the road, the dirt track, and competed in hill climbs. It even flew under a certain Evel Knievel. Instead of capitalizing on the buzz around the release of the new bike and putting out a road-going version right away, Harley Davidson waited until the 80s to release the XR1000. By then, it was hopelessly outdated and became a sales flop. By the way, at about the same time they scrapped the concept V4 Nova engine which they had been developing, an engine with liquid cooling and overhead cams. Good thing that no other company ever went on to develop a modern V4 and achieve success with it. Harley Davidson would look pretty silly today having missed an opportunity to accumulate 40 years of experience in building modern performance engines in a configuration no one else successfully used. Oh, Harley. And so we come to the XR1200, a tribute of sorts to the old XR750. Introduced in 2008 as the performance Harley, it actually lived up to the hype. Sort of. It still had push rods and air cooling, and it still weighed about as much as the USS Nimitz, but it put out over 90 horsepower, used more modern suspension and sport bike rubber on its 17-inch wheels, and looked super cool. Now I don't like to judge motorcycles by specs alone. Sometimes a bike that doesn't look all that impressive on paper puts together the right collection of attributes that make it greater than the sum of its parts. And so it is with this motorcycle. In short, I really liked it, but I won't be buying it. Allow me to explain. The XR1200 is not a rocket in the vein of pavement-shredding modern nakeds like the KTM Super Duke or the Ducati Street Fighter V4. A 2009 Suzuki SV650 would handle better around corners and hang with the 2009 XR in the straights, and it would cost half as much. But, I hate to use the character card here, but I will, because the XR just feels cool. It's not brutally fast, but it's fast enough for the street, and it feels like no other sporty naked bike out there. The first thing you'll notice is that it's thin and physically small. It's a dense hunk of heavy steel, and while it feels substantial, it is actually quite compact. I didn't feel cramped except for the foot pegs, which I'll get to later. The second thing you notice is the vibration. This thing vibrated a lot, even for a Harley. The engine jumped around on its mounts, but it also made the whole bike shake, rattle, and roll. The bars, the front wheel, the seat, this bike could double as a paint shaker when you're not riding it. The third thing I noticed was the sound. Now the pipe was not stock and definitely in the upper decibel range of what I'd be willing to subject my neighbors to. But the bike definitely sounded like a Harley. It had a rip snorting kind of growl that makes your arm hairs stand and sends chills down your spine. I got some of the sound on camera, but unfortunately my GoPro mic decided to quit shortly into the ride, and this is why you can't hear the bike throughout this video. Harleys either tend to snarl or lope along. This one tended toward the former. Just to be clear, I didn't have a problem with the vibration or the sound. In fact, I loved it. In an age of overly engineered and carefully sanitized middle-of-the-road products designed not to offend anyone, this is one that will offend and downright scare most people away, and I can appreciate that. It's loud and rude and obnoxious, although with a slightly quieter pipe it would still retain the character with a little less obnoxious in the mix. Everything on it feels industrial and sudden. The power definitely comes on fast, with the power pulses from the single crank pin causing the bike to lunge forward at slower speeds. All of this smooths out as the pace climbs and becomes a non-issue at regular road speeds, but in the parking lot this bike is a bit of a handful. On the road the bike is stable in the straight and in a turn. I suppose that appropriate rear suspension has a lot to do with this, as the suspension on the Sportster Iron models is absolute trash and should be the first thing that should go in the parts bin when you buy that bike. Thankfully the XR doesn't have that problem. So at speed this is a properly sporty bike. It pulls hard, turns fast enough, and feels different than any other sporty naked bike out there. It has a ton of torque where it counts at low revs, and although it's still an air-cooled Harley V-twin, tends to like revving higher than most Harleys. Did I mention it looks great? So why wouldn't I buy it? Well, it has several issues that I wasn't crazy about. One is the sudden power delivery. I've already made up my mind that any bike that I buy should also be rideable by my wife Brooke. She has been riding for a year, but the biggest bike she's ever ridden was the 321cc Yamaha MT-03. The XR1200 is 1200cc as the name implies, which isn't a huge deal. I guess that Brooke could handle a 1200 Sportster without issue. But this isn't a regular 1200 Sportster. The power on this bike comes on very aggressively, especially at slow speeds. In the parking lot, this thing is a handful to manage for a 120-pound female novice rider. Issue number 2 is the position of the pegs. This is the only Harley I've ever seen with rear sets. If there are others, I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments, but my point is that these bikes are not designed to have their pegs so far back. On the surface, it seems like a good idea to put the pegs further back and allow the rider to use their weight to control the bike. This works on all other naked bikes. But other nakeds don't have engines this wide. The typical naked bike is thin in the middle and has a wide tank. The XR1200 has a wide engine in the middle and a narrow tank, which puts your knees out in the wind. This is fine for cruisers, but if you want to grip the tank with your knees like riders do on sporty bikes, you end up sitting knock-kneed. Not long into the ride, my hips were screaming at me and I had to relent and let my knees out in the breeze, which felt super awkward with such a tight leg position. If I bought this bike, I'd mount mid-controls on it and ride it in a standard motorcycle position like a Sportster 883 Iron. Issue number 3 is the rear seat, or at least what passes for one on this bike. It looks cool, but is not meant for use by humans. I took Brooke on the back for a short hop and at the end she eagerly hopped off. Enough said. Issue 4 concerns the brakes. The XR1200 is one of the few smaller Harleys with dual discs, which I applaud. How a company can put out a 700+ pound bike like the Fat Boy with a single disc I still can't understand. But despite the 2 discs, the XR brakes are not good. At slow speeds they have almost no bite at all. At high speed they will slow this very heavy beast down, but you better squeeze hard. A sporty bike should have better brakes. Then again, maybe they were better when they were new. This is an 11-year-old bike after all. The final issue centers on reliability and availability of parts. Harley's reliability figures are actually pretty good. The motor company manages to beat the European brands in reliability data. However, this was an 11-year-old bike and the latest model you'll ever find is going to be a 2012. It's also a discontinued model that has many unique parts on it that do not appear on other Sportsters. Fixing the bike and replacing those parts is going to be expensive. Having said that, I chatted up an owner of one of these at a gas station recently, and he said that his bike, which has over 100,000 kilometers on it, has never broken down. That's a pretty good endorsement, but personally I'd rather have a regular Sportster because of the wide availability of parts and the huge number of mechanics who are familiar with these bikes. So the final verdict on the XR1200, I've crapped on Harley enough. I really like it. This is what the Sportster should have been all along if it was ever to live up to its name. Raw, rowdy, uncivilized, this bike embodies that Harley bad boy spirit. Too bad it's not around anymore. Now there's still the Roadster with its longer suspension, dual discs and low handlebar, although the rumor is that it's getting discontinued next year, which would totally figure. Once again I find myself in the strange position of liking a Harley Davidson and not liking the decisions of the company's brass. Do I recommend the XR? Yes, if you want a naked bike with personality and attitude. No, if you want ultimate performance. By the way, the second quarter of 2020 is the first time in decades that Harley recorded a financial loss. Harley's profits have been steadily falling, but they haven't been negative in a very long time. We'll examine why in the next video. Stay tuned, and I apologize if I'm taking longer between vids recently, but I'm in the middle of a move and life is crazy right now. We're moving to a much more motorcycle-friendly town near some beautiful roads and a massive off-road trail network in the Ganaraska forest. I should be back on track by the middle of October and have some nice scenery for your viewing pleasure. Ride safe. If you're interested in any of the gear that Brooke and I wear or use, or the camera equipment we use to film this channel, the links are below. Everything listed there was bought with our own money and we are not sponsored by any company. However, the links below are affiliate links and the channel is paid a small amount for referring you to shop at no additional cost to you. We do not recommend any products that we are not satisfied with ourselves, but we do strongly urge you to do your research and select the correct size for items like helmets and clothing. As always, thanks for watching, your support is greatly appreciated. Please hit that subscribe button, give the video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. And whatever you ride, enjoy it. Wave at other bikers no matter what they're riding, we're all part of a brotherhood and sisterhood. Keep the rubber side down, shiny side up, and may the spokes be with you.